Hi, I'm Josh.
And I'm not Josh.
Okay, Nick.
I'm Nick.
And we are the Hypertrophic Movies. Today we are going to be talking about red wines and just some general stuff that we've learned about them because we're totally experts.
Exactly. I'm tired today, guys. So that's what you're getting right now.
Stop whining.
Ah.
Okay, so we're starting off with reds because for a lot of people, maybe not at first, a lot of people start to go towards red wines as their favorites over time. Mainly because reds just tend to have a lot more flavor than whites. At least that's what I think personally.
I mean that's obviously very subjective, but
Yeah.
so red wines are red because they have they're red grapes,
Yeah.
obviously. God, I'm telling you guys, I'm tired, so this is going to be a very uneducational episode from my point of view. Uh, uh, Yeah, but as far as I understand, the tannins for the red grapes, they're a little bit more bitter at times, and I think they do have a little bit more flavor to them in general, as far as I understand.
Yeah, in general. So to kind of touch on tannins, so tannins are, if I understand it, they come from the grape skins, and the more you leave that in wine during the winemaking process, changes the flavor. With red grapes specifically, they start off very bitter, and a lot of winemakers will leave those in longer with red wines to get a lot more flavor out of them, versus with white wines, which actually have a different process. Those get taken out early because I don't know why it is about white grapes. It just tends to make the flavor worse most of the time, leaving those in longer. Obviously, this changes from grape to grape, but in general, red wines have a lot more of it left in there during the process, and a lot more flavor gets extracted that way.
Yeah, and I guess we won't hit on this too much right now, but you saying that kind of made me realize we really don't know a lot about the actual winemaking process,
We
which is
really
kind of
don't.
interesting.
We're gonna have to look into that so that we can actually make an episode on that and not sound
Yeah,
like
we
idiots.
we need to educate ourselves and then report on it in an episode.
Agreed.
Yeah, but as far as I understand, tannins are literally just the grape skins, as far as I know.
Yeah.
And then they're kind of mashed into a pulp, obviously, in the winemaking process and all that.
Yeah. And as a
Um,
general rule, it's basically tannins are more often left in red wines, and more often than not, they make a wine bitter. And sometimes that's good. It depends on the wine, though.
right. Yeah. Um, so I mean, depending on if you're talking about dry reds or sweet reds, is going to make a big difference in what you're pairing. What kind of food you're pairing it with. But it's all you kind of also have like a two-dimensional graph. You'd have dry on one end of the continuum and white. Uh, I'm very tired.
Yeah, I'll help. To kind of put it in very simple, plain terms, with reds, there's basically, I guess I'll call them like three rough categories. You have your semi-dry and dry reds, which are for a lot of people, those are going to be the last wines they really get into, but they're the complex ones. They're the ones you hear about people talking about the smell and the notes and all the crazy flavors. You have your semi-sweet and sweet blushes and rosés and sweet reds in general.
Well, okay, I know blushes and rosés are kind of their own thing, though, so let's not get too
Yeah.
much into that yet.
And these
But
are the reds where, and he is right on that. Blush and rosés are kind of separate. A lot of people see them as reds, which is just why I mentioned them. But they're the simpler reds. They're usually thick. A lot of them can be a little syrupy, and they'll still have a little bit of flavor, but they'll always taste simpler compared to a dry red. Then the last category, which I consider reds, but they're really not,
port.
are fruit wines.
Oh, fruit wines. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Fruit wines generally will be red in color, but they'll be opaque, and they're made from things like raspberries and strawberries and sometimes apples, things like that. They're always very syrupy, very simple in flavor, and very sugary sweet. They're for dessert.
I didn't even really think about fruit wines. Fruit wines are kind of almost a separate category. There's red and there's white and then there's fruit. But you do make a good point because most of those are still going to be reddish in color, just
Yeah.
because of the fruit. And a lot of fruit wines might have a non-grape fruit in them, but they also have grape in them as well.
Not always. There's some fruit ones that are made specifically just from the fruit. It
Well, that is
depends.
true too.
And
Yeah.
again, this is another one. It depends. There's as you will find out with wine, there is no set process. What you think is a set in stone thing for wine, one day you're going to find out it's not,
Pretty
as we have
much,
been finding out.
pretty much, you can make wine out of any kind of fruit. Pretty much, any kind of fruit because it's got sugar and you can ferment it and
Yeah.
everything. Because we've had wine that's been made out of strawberries. We've had wine made out of we've had like stuff like jalapeno wine, but that's an example of a wine that has some grape in there as well, right? Because like jalapeno, and this is getting on
Yeah.
track, but like that'd be a white grape with like jalapeno in it as well. Anyway, it's
Yeah.
there's a lot of options for what you can make into wine.
Yeah.
There's technically dandelion wine, isn't there? That's a thing.
Yeah, and that's more of like what you're talking. That's going to be more of a grape with an additional somehow dandelion extracted flavor added. Like I
Yeah,
said, it really depends. It depends on the fruit or the additive if it's going to be added to a grape or not, and then depending on where you add it and when is going to change what kind of wine it is. It's a whole process.
yeah,
But at least in general, with the reds and with most wines in general, uh, you're going to start off liking the sweet reds more than the dry reds. And it's a little bit more complicated with the reds because, unlike whites, you get kind of completely different flavors depending on what you like at the moment. So if you're at a state where you generally like the sweet reds, and if you try to drink a dry red, you're more than likely only going to taste one or two flavors. It's going to be hard for you to notice the more complex stuff.
Oh yeah, starting off, you don't know what you're doing for sure.
And so it's going to be, I mean, basically you're going to hate those wines and you're going to think they're stupid. And we were there at that point too, and we agree. When you're still enjoying the sweet stuff, dry reds just taste stupid.
Okay, so for example, in Missouri, our state grape is the Norton grape, just Norton, which is also referred to as the Cynthiana for some reason, but it's always referred to as the Norton though. But anyway, um, it is a dry red, and it's actually pretty damn good. But you definitely have to develop your taste for it.
Yeah.
And so like when Josh and I and our friends started wine tasting back like 4 years ago or whatever, we would try the Norton which was available at most wineries in Missouri, and we really weren't a fan of it. But we've gotten used to it over the years. I'm still not a huge fan of it, but I've had some Nortons that were pretty exceptional, and I've definitely bought a bottle or two from a few wineries in the past of Norton.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I agree with him. And for me, like the telltale sign that I'm starting to enjoy certain red wines is how much I tend to notice the background flavors. So, like for instance, and this is where a lot of times the notes that are written down for you are the best thing to look at. But so, like for instance, I don't know which grapes these are, but you'll see wines that'll say like they have coffee notes or raspberry notes in addition to just tasting the wine. And the more you tend to notice those, the more likely it is that you're starting to enjoy that wine. At least in my personal, and like I'm not saying like that's your favorite one, but it's kind of a sign that the more you can see that, the more that it's kind of grown on you.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And
It there's so many wines have so many layers of complexity in the flavor that you have to get used to those initial layers before you can actually notice the ones beneath that. And I know here's the thing. I hope this doesn't make us sound pretentious because I know there's this cliche that wine enthusiasts are pretentious
yeah.
assholes. But the thing is, really truly, some wine actually is very complex, and you know, having that particular, field of interest to look into, you can really start noticing subtle differences and, figuring out, I like this wine as opposed to this wine. And it really is an experience. So, yeah, but it definitely takes time to figure. And I think we are intermediate as far as wine tasting goes. We don't know
Yeah, we
everything.
are
Yeah.
we are not experts yet, but that's kind of why we're doing these podcasts as a. I mean, we're trying to give you an intro into wine as looked at by people who, 4 years ago, we had absolutely no knowledge whatsoever on wine.
Yeah.
Zero.
Yeah.
And then, what was I going to say? I forgot what I was going to say.
Well, okay. So talking about reds in general, though, generally, and this is a rule that is a pretty easy rule to remember. Red wines pair well with red meats,
Yes.
and also white wines pair well with white meats. So that's really easy to remember. Um, but it's because a lot of red meat. There's a lot of flavor there, which isn't so much in like white meat.
Yeah.
And similarly, the red wines have a little bit more boldness to their flavor usually. So nothing gets overpowered, when you have two, a food that's bold and a drink that's bold, like one doesn't overpower the other. So it actually works out pretty well.
Absolutely. And I agree. Yeah, that is the general rule. Red pairs with red, but kind of more so bold cheeses and bold meats and bold things in general are what pairs with reds, not necessarily red meats, because there are some, like, there's cases where that doesn't necessarily work, but it's
Oh
always a
yeah.
case of bold flavors match.
Yeah, yeah, and that's definitely true.
And again, that's exactly why I like reds, because they're bold and because they're complicated and they're hard to figure out versus whites are fun, they're easy, they're simple. And while they're good, especially in the summer, I just, long term, I think reds are more enjoyable because there's just more to figure out.
I don't know. I like white wines a lot too. But I know what you're saying. Absolutely. Um, sorry,
You stop that.
I'm yawning. Okay, but here's the thing. So, as you slowly traverse into getting more and more accustomed to dry wines, you'll find that okay, I like these dry reds. I'm gonna find red meats to pair with it, and like you said, not
Yeah.
all red meats, but a lot of them. And you also find that a lot of spicy foods, like especially like spicy Italian foods, that kind of stuff goes really well with a dry or like a semi-dry red wine.
Mm-hmm.
Very good, very good. But what I wanted to say is, while you're still sticking to the sweet side of your wine tasting experience, um, some reds that are pretty sweet go really well with chocolate.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, more so than anything. And the one that you're always going to hear, and I'm just going to mention it, but then we're going to touch on this in a different episode, is ports.
Oh,
Ports
absolutely.
are they're the one you hear about that pairs with chocolate, but other red wines, especially the semi-sweets, at least for me personally, I think the semi-sweets more so than the sweet reds pair really well with chocolate. Just because chocolate, you don't always notice it. Chocolate can be a little bit, have like a bitter taste in the background, and that kind of goes really well with the semi-sweet reds.
So you're saying that semi-sweet is better than sweet
At
for
least,
red with chocolate?
at least me personally, that's just what I found personally.
Oh,
So like
yeah.
Chambersons,
Okay. Yeah.
and Chamberson is a kind of red wine, obviously. But that's just an example. And there's just reds. Reds are fun. There's just reds are complex. That's the best way we can describe it. Reds are weird. They're complex. There's just, I hate to say it, there's more to reds than with whites. And not downgrading whites. Whites have their place, and whites are definitely delicious. And there's a lot of people who prefer whites because of that. But reds, they have a lot of layers, and because of that, there's a lot of things that happen, a lot of ways to pair it, and a lot of things to do with them, like making ports or mulled wine, for instance.
Yeah. See, I do want to emphasize though, I feel like that's definitely your opinion on reds. I don't know if I agree with that. Um, but I definitely see where you're coming from. But there are a lot of whites out there that I think are amazing, and they're
Yeah.
very complex too. But like we were saying at the beginning of this episode, because of like the bitterness of those tannins that are more prominent in the reds, Um, I can definitely see where you're coming from though.
Yeah. Like I said,
Um,
like I love whites, but at least from what I found, and there's definitely some complex whites out there. I agree with you. Just like in general, is what I'm saying. As we stated much earlier in this, there's always wines, always wines that go out of the norm. But at least in general, I found that reds tend to be more complicated than whites.
okay, yeah, I mean, fair enough. Something else I wanted to mention. We were talking about chocolate. It, pairing sweet-ish reds with chocolate, it really depends on what your red is and also what your chocolate is. Because I've had experiences where I've had your actual real chocolate. Not, you don't want to even mess with that fake candy
Yeah.
chocolate,
Oh
but
yeah.
real like cacao or how you pronounce it, chocolate. The stuff that you get at, like, I don't know, real like Whole Foods or something like that.
Yeah.
Not like Hershey's. Don't even bother with that. Um, but like some of the real chocolate, it is kind of bitter.
Yeah.
And actually, like supposedly the darker the chocolate is, the more healthy it's for you. But anyway, my point is, like, yeah, you can have some chocolate that has some bitterness to it, and in some cases you want to have a red that's semi-sweet rather than sweet, so you don't like interfere with the bitterness level. But sometimes it's kind of cool to drink a sweet red and then take a bite of your semi-bitter chocolate and then drink the sweet red again, and the sweetness of the red can like enhance the bitterness or enhance the sweetness of the chocolate, and it's this whole experience, which is really cool. And but the vice versa can happen too. You can have a semi-sweet rather than a sweet red, and have a sweet chocolate rather than like a sort of bitter chocolate. So I guess my recommendation would be, if you're messing around with sweets and semi-sweet reds, also experiment with the chocolates you're pairing with them, because there's all these different combinations, and you might find one combination you like more than another. You
Yeah.
know.
Absolutely, just something you got to play around with. But that is a good point. If you're one thing I do want to bring up, and basically what he touched on, when you're at wineries and they do give you chocolate to taste with the wine, more often than not, it is going to be dark chocolate, just because at least for a lot of people, that's what they see as the kind of chocolate to eat with wine. And kind of also, as he was touching on, that's also a thing. That's a personal preference. You may find that you don't like dark chocolate with wine. There's no right answer to that, but it is what you'll most often find.
Yeah. I think we're probably about to end this episode. However, I did want to see. We should talk. We should, like, what's your favorite red, and then I'll tell you what my favorite red is.
That's been changing for me a lot lately. A year ago or 2 years ago, I would have said Pinot Noir, and I still love Pinot Noirs. For me, they're very straightforward, for lack of a better word. I still get a lot of layers to them, but they're work. They're not overboard. These days, I'm not so sure. I've been kind of starting to go towards a lot of the red wines that have like those coffee and oaky flavors.
Oh, okay. Those
But
are
I
good.
but I
Yeah.
couldn't really give you a specific grape because there's so many damn grapes out there that I just don't know anymore.
What might be like your top three?
It's a I don't know. Pinot Noir is probably third place. I don't know what grapes are second and first place, but they would be the reds that have the oaky and coffee flavors to them.
Okay.
Uh, I, I think Chamberson would probably be fourth place for me, but that being said, there's a lot of Chambersons I've had that just don't taste great.
Okay. Okay. Um, my top, my number one red right now is gonna be Malbec, and that's been the way ever since I had a Malbec. I think I felt
Yeah.
that way, um, because it's dry, but it's not like overbearingly dry, and there's a bit of sweetness in there, and Malbecs just seem to have a lot of depth to them, so that would be my pick. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. And I like Chamberson's, one of my favorites. Um, I'm gonna sound like an idiot here, but like, okay, Zinfandel, that is a red, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and
There's Zinfandel and then there's white Zinfandel.
okay, but like the regular Zinfandel is a red, And then Syrah is also red, correct?
Yes.
Okay, because I'm just trying to. It's hard to keep track of all these. Like Zinfandel, Syrah, Malbec. I love those reds. They're amazing. So anyway,
Yeah.
those are mine.
If it helps, this is good proof for you that don't feel like you have to memorize names of grapes and wines, because even to this day, we are still having trouble.
Yeah, yeah.
It's crazy.
It's an experience. It's awesome.
Yeah, so basically, it's one of those reds are interesting, and like all other wines, just the last note I want to leave on. Don't always try to figure out wines. Whenever you're at a winery, look at the notes they have and just make it your goal to drink the wine and see if you can tell what's in it.
You mean notes like they have a list
Yeah,
of the wines and
like
actually describe them?
almost
Yeah.
every winery will have a description, and just make it your goal to look at that description and say, can you notice that or can you not?
Right. And as I've always been emphasizing, ask questions if you have questions. It's the only way you're going to learn, So,
Yeah.
yep.
So we will leave it off there. Next time we are going to be talking about white wines.
Yeah. See ya.